All right. Hello. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of Oregon Fall Workshop, Civil Discourse in Today's Diverse World. I'm Becky Gladstone, League President. I'll take a moment to highlight our action committee tonight, our two remaining sessions in the workshop, and then introduce today's speaker for Diffusing Contentious Conversations. For 101 years, the League has educated voters and advocated on issues, never supporting or opposing candidates or political parties. Yesterday, I introduced constructive conversations highlighting voter education. Today, I'm giving kudos to our 25 plus members who watch hearings, research legislation, and advocate on all sorts of issues. We've seen legislators in the minority, either side, walk out, halting visible work, preventing a voting quorum. We saw bills die before they could deliver needed solutions, despite bipartisan support. Some negotiated over several sessions. Today, with fires, COVID, and 1 in 5 hungry in my county, we see tensions flaring firsthand in Oregon. I encourage you to subscribe to weekly email briefs, linked to in-depth legislative reports during legislative sessions. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Terry Busch holds a Ph.D. in political science from Miami University and taught political science at Denison University. He served in Germany and Vietnam as an Army Medical Service Corps officer, followed by years as a leadership expert and senior CIA executive. Today, he's a management consultant and workshop facilitator for Braver Angels, a national nonprofit. He's written 225 articles for managers and leaders. See insightfulmanagers.com for his most recent What the Best Managers Know and Do. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Busch.
Thank you, Becky. And for those of you that didn't hear me before, it is really a special honor for me to have an opportunity to talk to the League of Women Voters, because your organization was how I learned to vote. It's how I learned to think about candidates. It's how I learned to get the facts. It's how I started. And so my wife and I continue to be highly dependent on all the things you do to make sure we stay informed. So when Kathleen Hirsch called me, she said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And she framed for me what this event was all about. And I said, how about something that we in Braver Angels, and I should say that I am an active member of Braver Angels, a certified moderator, and I do a whole lot of a broad range of workshops for Braver Angels. So I said, we spend a lot of time in all of our workshops trying to get people to do exactly what you're talking about. How do you get them to have civil conversations when at least one party doesn't want to? So thus was born the title, Diffusing Contentious Conversations. So my plan is to spend a little bit of time outlining some things and a strategy for you to do this, and then to give you an opportunity to actually practice the skills that I'm going to talk about and give some feedback on those skills that the whole group can hear and share. So I hope everybody has something they can write with and jot down so that it makes the exercise work a little bit better. When I talk about this subject, I like to put it in some kind of a broad context. When a discussion is taking place between two people, regardless of the issue, where one person disagrees with the other, sometimes in very fundamental ways about the issue and how to approach the issue and what the causes of the issue are, there are two paradigms that conversation can take. The one I fear is most common these days among many people who disagree, particularly about politics, is what we call an argument. And what characterizes an argument is the goal. The goal of an argument is to win. That's the whole idea of an argument, to marshal your facts, your brilliant rhetoric, to just overwhelm the other side. You want to win. You want to change the other person's point of view. You want to convert the person, and you want to let them know if they're not willing to come your way that they're really not very smart. All right, that's an argument. And arguments generally end up with somebody feeling they did a better job than the other. So one person walks away thinking, well, I won, and the other person walks away feeling either angry or disappointed that they didn't do better and that they lost. Well, there's an alternative paradigm, and it's the paradigm we call a conversation. And what distinguishes a conversation from an argument is the goal. The goal of a conversation is not to win. The goal of a conversation is, hold for it, to understand. Simply to understand. Why do you feel the way you do? How did you come by this view? And once you understand that, simply accept it. It's the other person's point of view. They feel very strongly about it. I respect the fact that you don't look at this the way I do, but I understand more about how you got to where you are. And that opens the door for another critical step, and that is to look for common ground. We may disagree about this issue and how to approach it, but there are a few things, it seems to me, we both agree on. And if we can come together on that, we have an opportunity perhaps to move forward. So the comments that I'm going to make really are designed to help you think about, how do you take a contentious conversation or a contentious discussion, which tends to be an argument, and that's why it's contentious. And how do you move that, hopefully, in the direction, nudge it, if you will, in the direction of making it more of a conversation where you can at least understand one another and find common ground. All right. So if I can get this right, I'm going to start by, I'm going to share a couple of slides in this process. Bear with me if we have any glitches. When you are in an argument, chances are the person who wants to argue with you is what we in Bravery Angels call a gladiator. Gladiators are attackers. They're aggressive. And one way you know you're dealing with a gladiator is that they very often want to tell you how it is, as opposed to how they think it is or how they believe it might be. They talk in absolutes. This is what's going to happen. This is how it is. Shut up and listen to me. All right. So that's what makes the conversation contentious to begin with. You're dealing with, in many cases, a gladiator whose goal here is to win. So how do you get the gladiator to be more open to what you want to say, to be more respectful of your point of view? That's what we're talking about. So the first slide I want to share is this one. So the first thing you want to be aware of when you're dealing with a gladiator is that you're not foolish enough to allow yourself to get baited. And they love to do this. They really do. To say something outrageous that you get upset about and you want to argue back. So when you're dealing with a gladiator and you sense they're trying to bait you into the kind of emotional response you don't want, we at Bravery Angels say there's 3 strategies you can use. You can directly head off the conversation. Simply say, look, now's not the time to talk about it that way. Or you can use humor, like, well, that's a good one, Alex or Janet. Then just simply change the subject. See the Ducks play last Saturday. Or if necessary, give a very serious response to it. Say, you know, not everyone in this group or who's listening to us agrees with you on this. Perhaps we should move on. If the gladiator is unwilling to do it, then the conversation should cease at this point. But in most cases, if you don't get yourself baited by a gladiator, you'll be in pretty good stead. So let me move on to the next slide now. This is a strategy that in some form or another we use in quite a few of our Braver Angels It's a pretty straightforward strategy. I will warn you, it seems very simple. It seems almost intuitive. It is easy to talk about. It requires a lot of practice. It requires some bravery. And sometimes, no matter how hard you work at it, you're dealing with somebody that's just not interested in going in the direction you want to go. So let me talk about each of these skills one at a time. First, the clarify skill. The first thing you want to do in a contentious conversation is to try to make it clear to the other person that you're paying attention, that you're listening to them. So you say things like, okay, if I understand you correctly, I think your main point is, and then you paraphrase it. Or you can simply say, are you saying that? And then you paraphrase it. Or you can say, to reinforce that you're listening, okay, I get it. I get it. You're really bothered by, and then you paraphrase what they said. The important thing about a paraphrase is that you don't editorialize. For example, you begin by saying, I don't understand how any morons can agree with, and then you give the paraphrase, because they don't get to the paraphrase phase. They're thinking about the fact you just called them a moron and they want to argue about that. All right. So you simply want to play back to them, I think your main point is, and then as accurately as you can, lay it out for them as you heard it from them. And let's look at what clarifying does for the conversation. It indicates to the gladiator that you're listening. And it can also help the gladiator hear himself or herself and whether or not they're being misinterpreted or they didn't think they were coming across that way. It indicates you're interested in understanding them and in understanding perhaps the story behind their particular point of view. So this strategy always begins with a clarification, which is a paraphrase, and you're looking for some indication. Sometimes it's a nod of the head, sometimes it's, yep, you got it, that's what I said. An indication from them that you understood clearly what they had to say. Okay, once you've done that, then you move on to what we call the agree skill. Now, let me be clear about what I'm talking about here. We're not talking about agreeing with their whole point of view. We're not talking about certainly you agreeing with the hyperbolic language that they are using, the stereotyping, the dismissing, the ridiculing you're hearing. You're not agreeing with that. But you'll probably find something, usually whatever the issue is, that you can find some area of agreement. So for example, you could say to a gladiator, boy, having listened to you, and I know myself, we both really think the immigration system in this country is screwed up. Or you might say, well, listening to you and knowing how I feel about this, it's clear that both of us think something seriously has to be done about our healthcare system. Or you might say, well, it might surprise you, but I'm as concerned about the regulatory powers of the federal government as you are. You're finding an area of agreement that lies in the issue itself and your concern for the issue, but you're not necessarily agreeing with what might be a fairly extreme position on how we got there, what to do about it, etc. So the agreement skill builds on the clarification skills. You've established a bond with a gladiator by saying, you know, here's what I hear you saying. And now you take it the next step by sharing with them the fact that, at least in this area, we can agree. Now we come to the next step in the process, which we call the pivot. And I'm always amazed how confused some people get when we talk about it as a pivot. I like to talk about it as a turn signal. We all know why we put our turn signal on, or most of us do. I do until my wife tells me I forgot to do it, to let some driver know coming behind us or in our direction that we're going to do something, that we want to do something before we actually do it. Well, in a conversation that is contentious, that we're trying to move in the direction of a conversation, we want to let the person know that we have a different optic on this issue that we would like to share with them. So the pivot is a statement by you that says to somebody else, I'd like to share a slightly different point of view. Remember, you've already clarified, you've already talked about the area of agreement. So a pivot sounds something like this. You know, this issue is as important to me as it is to you. I've lived with this issue, you know, basically all my life. Can I give you my thoughts on this issue? And then you pause and see what happens. Sometimes a gladiator may say, sure, what do you think? Sometimes they may just start going off again on the particular issue. So you may have to come back at this again. You may have to say to them, hey, I'm really asking you if you mind if I share my perspective on this issue. You don't want to progress until you get some kind of an agreement from the gladiator that they're willing to at least hear what you have to say. So you may have to go back through the clarification part of this, back through the agreement part of this, and another pivot statement that says, is it okay with you if I share the fact that I have a slightly different optic on this topic? And then if that happens, if you successfully get your way through all three of those steps, now it's time for you to share your perspective. And what we encourage people to bear in mind here is to avoid the same kind of absolutist language that you may have heard from the gladiator. Don't try to tell them, no, you're wrong. This is how it is. We call it using I statements. So when you give your perspective on the issue, you can say, now, the way I look, you're owning it, the way I look at immigration, the way I look at healthcare, the way I look at the size of the federal government, the way I look at regulatory powers is this. Or you might say, you know, I've been reading lately some interesting articles on this subject. Do you mind if I share what they have to say? What I take away from these articles is it's much less aggressive when you are owning what you want to say to the person than it is when you come across in absolutist terms. So those are the basic steps in the process. Remember, your goal is to move the conversation from an argumentative framework into a conversation designed to gain understanding so that both sides have a deeper understanding of why each other sees things the way they do. It starts with a clarifying statement. It continues with an agreement about something that you both can agree to. The pivot is critical because it says to the aggressor, I want to change the subject. I want to go off in a slightly different direction, but I want you to agree to do that. And then, of course, the perspective given as an I statement. Does it work? Sometimes. Sometimes you have to do it with an aggressor a couple of times. You have to go back through the clarifying and the agreement and getting permission to share your perspective. And at other times, it doesn't work at all. Some people just simply do not want to go there. And what we say in our workshops to people is, look, when CAPP fails, exit the conversation. Just say, look, we've beaten this one to death. It's time to quit. Or it's getting late, I'm tired. Perhaps we should pick this up some other time. Or I just have to go, and exit the conversation. The most important thing you want to do in a failed attempt with a true gladiator is to try to get the last word in. It's the worst thing you can possibly do, because a good gladiator is never going to let you get the last word in. They just aren't. And it's just an invitation for this to keep going until both of you are really pretty angry. So let them have the last word, exit the conversation, pat yourself on the back for having tried to move in a different direction, but having failed. All right. At this point, I want to stop and see if there are any questions before I move off into the little exercise I want to do with you guys. Now, I hope every one of you wrote down the skills, all right? Clarify, agree, pivot, and perspective. Now I'm going to share two scenarios. And I will leave them up on the screen for a while you do your writing. Everybody see the two scenarios? Becky?
Yes, they look
Okay.
great.
So I'll read them. You can respond to one or the other of these, or if you're an overachiever, do them both. All right, but I'll read them first. The first is a conservative gladiator. The subject here is gun violence. So here's a conservative gladiator. Notice the absolutist terms that are used in this scenario. Man, I'm as upset as anybody about gun violence. But it's bad people or crazy people, not guns, that are murdering people. Come on. No one should take away my right to own a gun because a small number of people are misusing their guns. We have to respect the Constitution. Liberals are being dishonest about gun control. They know that taking away people's guns is not the answer, because the bad guys will always find a way to get a weapon. Democrats are playing on the public's ignorance and fears. Every time there's a mass shooting, man, it makes me furious. So that's a conservative gladiator. Same issue, here's a liberal gladiator. Those mass shootings must stop, man. They just have to stop. We have more guns than people in this country, and people are allowed to own weapons of war. The conservatives are completely brainwashed or controlled by the NRA and refuse to look at the simple reality that limiting access to guns reduces gun violence and suicides. Why can't we be like other countries that limit guns to a few people who need them? I'll tell you why. The Republicans stir up the fears that the government is going to start by taking away guns and then go after your other freedoms. It's crazy thinking. So you see the absolutist terms. This is not them telling you what they think about anything. They're telling you how it is. Okay, so here's what I would like you to do. And we'll do each skill one at a time. The first thing I'd like you to do is pick one of these two scenarios, and I'll leave it up while you write it down and then take it back, and write a clarification statement. Clarify what you heard. And I'm the aggressor. I'm either the conservative gladiator or the liberal gladiator. And you're going to say, Terry, and then you're going to give me a clarifying statement. Okay, who would like to share their clarifying statement? Raise your hand, either physically or your little yellow hand on the screen, and then unmute yourself.
Don't be shy.
Okay,
Like
go for it.
I chose to respond to the conservatives' argument. And I would say your main concern seems to be that liberals want to respond to gun violence by taking away your right to own a gun.
Okay, that's an excellent clarifying statement. It's what I said. And it's not editorialized. That's excellent. Norman, you have your hand up.
Well, my clarifying statement is in the form of a question. I find it most important to clarify in terms of understanding questions. And the first one would be, is it just crazy people that are uh, killing with guns?
Well, I like the question, but it's not really a clarifying statement. If it's a question, you're asking me to continue with my line of argumentation.
Okay.
You're not really, it's a great question, and it's something that you probably will get to in a conversation at some point. But as a clarification of what I said, I didn't say that. You're challenging whether it's just crazy people. And I don't know, I may want to argue with you about that. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
The clarification should simply be a paraphrase of what I said.
Yeah, had to unmute myself. Yes, I do. Mike, I chose a conservative one too, because it was just the first one. My clarification statement would be that you are saying that you're concerned about gun violence, but you still would like to own a gun yourself, correct?
Yes, that's what I said. And
That
that's
was
all.
my statement.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I said.
Oh, okay.
And it's a
okay.
clarification of what I said, and it doesn't editorialize or criticize. It's just what I said. And now, Sally, I think you listen to me. And that's the goal here. No, I'm serious.
Yeah, right, I hear you.
This is simple stuff. You want me to say, well, Sally paid attention. Who else wants to share?
There's a comment in the chat. I can read it if you like.
Go ahead, read it. Are you
She
saying?
says, Jamie says, here's my clarifying statement. I'm as upset as you about gun violence, and we should respect our Constitution. I don't think taking guns away is the answer either.
So who wrote that?
That was Jamie Carlton. Hi, Jamie.
So
Hi.
Jamie, you've jumped ahead to an agree statement.
Oh, okay.
Look at your statement and see if you don't agree with me that it's an agree statement.
Okay.
You're as
I agree.
concerned as I am. It's a point of agreement. So you're one step ahead in the process without having first clarified what I said.
Okay, I see.
Not that it's a bad agreement statement. It's a very good agreement statement,
Okay,
but it's not clarifying. This
So in
isn't
other
as simple
words-
as it sounds. It really isn't. Who else
so in
wants?
other words, I see that you're upset about this. And so I hear you saying that you're upset and you want to own a gun and you think our Constitution should be followed. In other words, something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a paraphrase of what I said. If I've heard you correctly, you're concerned about this or concerned about that. It's simply giving back to me what you heard me say, what you think my major problem is without editorializing.
Okay,
And you move on to an area of agreement. Well, I'm as concerned as you are about this.
at least I got the second part right.
Well, it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of practicing the sequence because the sequence is important. The clarification part of this establishes an initial bond. As I said with Sally, oh, good, you listened to me, right? I was heard. I feel good about that. I was really articulate, wasn't I? And you listened to me. I feel good. What's next? All right, one more. Who wants to share their clarification statement? I'm all ears.
Okay, so you believe that the misusing of guns is causing the problem of gun violence, and you are concerned that there would be draconian mitigation measures taken and everybody would lose their gun.
Okay, that is a clarifying statement. My only suggestion is put a period after the first part. Read it again.
So you believe that the misusing of guns is causing the problem,
Period.
violence, period.
If you just put a period there, that's an excellent clarifying statement. You actually made two clarifying statements.
Yeah,
There were two sentences there. You don't have to necessarily do that. You can. There wasn't anything wrong with either sentence, but you could have stopped after the first one and I would have said, yes, that's right.
okay. So I shouldn't try to,
It doesn't matter. You have to do, this is an individual kind of thing. I'm only saying that your clarifying statement can be very short and very simple. The important thing is you get me to say, well, yeah, Dolores, thanks for listening. You're right. That is my concern. Now you have the beginning of a bond. Okay, so you all now have this clarification thing, right? It is a paraphrase. So it should be as close to what I said as you possibly can make it. Because if it's not, what am I going to do? I'm going to argue with you. No, that's not what I said. You got it wrong. And then we're still locked in the argument paradigm, right? You want to move out of the argument paradigm and into the conversation paradigm where we just want to understand each other. Okay. Now I'm going to put the scenarios back up. You've now clarified, and I'm happy. You have paid attention to my screed, my rants. Now you want to write an agreement statement. What is it in these rants of mine that you can agree with? Not the rant, not the language, not the absolutist view of these issues, but what is it where you can say, it looks like you and I both agree, Terry, that. So I'll give you about a minute to write down your agreement statement. You're still trying to establish this bond with me. Now I'm looking at the chat room and Jamie Carlton has written, I'm as upset as you are about gun violence and that we should respect the Constitution. I don't think taking guns away is the answer either. Now that's an excellent agreement statement. We agree on that. Taking guns away isn't the answer. I still feel good. You're still on my side. You paraphrased what I had to say, and now we're at least in agreement on this. And I still feel good, and I want to continue to talk to you. That's a good agreement statement.
Okay, Terry, we agree on this. The toll in lives that guns are taking is horrendous.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody hear that? Sounds like we agree on something. Not necessarily on my language, not necessarily on my extreme view of how we should deal with this, but this is a piece of it we agree with. Well done.
Terry, we agree that we have too many guns and some are for war.
Yeah, that's a good agreement statement. Notice how these are just simple and straightforward. But I warn you that in really heated conversations, it is so bloody easy to go beyond this. See, we're all kind of relaxed now and we're concentrating on the skill and we're really trying it. And we're not emotionally geared up. So it's somewhat easier in this kind of environment to do it than sometimes when we're really in a conversation with someone who, I don't like this person, and listen to them, you know. So the simpler you make these statements, the easier it is for it to be a true clarification, a true agreement. Okay, anybody else? Let's have a couple more.
Okay, I said that I agree that guns shouldn't be taken away from people who use them properly, or I was searching for the right descriptor, but yeah, I think people who are using it in a reasonable fashion should be able to keep their guns.
Okay, it's an excellent agreement statement. We both agree on that.
I agree that there's too much gun violence in this country and that we must find a way to address it.
Yep. Okay. Nothing offensive there. No reason for me to want to argue with that statement. And we're still bonding. Because remember what the next step is. The next step here, you're setting up the pivot. You're setting up asking me to allow you to share a different perspective. So this is good. One last agreement statement. These are all good. Margaret?
I agree that it's just a small number of people who are misusing guns.
Sounds good to me. We agree. Okay, well done. Now comes the pivot. I'll put the scenarios back up one more time. All right, so you've now bonded with me. I'm kind of into this, right? You clarified, we have an agreement here. Now you want to write a statement, short statement, a sentence or two at the most that indicates that you want to take this conversation in a different direction, that you're going to offer a perspective that isn't like the one you're looking at in these two gladiator rants. So take about 30 to 45 seconds to write down a pivot statement. Now, this is the crucial part of the transition you're aiming for. We were in an argumentative mode. You're nudging me in the direction of a conversation where I'm willing to accept the fact that we don't agree and that I respect the disagreements. So somebody share their pivot statement with me.
I'm here. I knew I shouldn't have chatted.
Come on, Mimi.
Well, I was thinking about Margaret's, her statement of clarity, or her agreement statement, where she said, I think we agree that there's too much gun violence. And then I thought maybe I would
So look directly at me and say, Terry, what's your pivot statement?
Terry, would you be willing to listen to my ideas about how we might reduce the number of mass shootings in the United States?
That's a pivot statement. And what are you going to do, Amy, if I said, I don't see why, you're not going to change my mind on this? What's your next response?
I don't know. You have to tell me what the next pivot is.
Well, you don't need another pivot. You've already told me.
I'm ready to move to perspective then, right?
Well, are you?
No, because they're really arguing with me.
Right. I mean, you've told me, I'm just doing this to show you what can happen. You've asked, you said, do you mind if I share my views on this subject? That's an excellent pivot. You've told me you want to go in a different direction. I may say, well, sure, Mimi, go ahead. I'm all ears. Or I might look at you and say, well, I don't know why I would listen to you, because you're going to be wrong and I'm right. So what would your follow-on be to that? I would suggest you keep going in the same direction you're going. How could you do that?
Well, we already established that we agree that there is a problem with gun violence and guns in the hands of misuse of guns. Right?
Right. So where I'm going here is you might say, you don't want to listen to my point of view. Look, all I'm asking you to do is at least listen to a slightly different perspective on the subject. Or, in the articles that I'm reading, it doesn't seem as cut and dried to me as it is to many people. Can I share some of my thought? In other words, you want to keep coming back because you're asking for permission. You want me to relent and tell you, okay. So that's the reason I did what I did, is to say, you may get a sure, tell me what you think, or you may get, no, I don't care what you think because you're wrong. And why should I listen to that? Now that's pig-headed and not very sensible conversation, but it's what some gladiators might do. So you might want to try yet again with another, pivot statement. All I'm asking you to do is to listen to a slightly different optic. Is that okay? And I either say yes or no. And if the answer is no, this conversation isn't going anywhere.
So maybe right there, I clarify again and say, okay, so what you're saying is that you'd rather not hear what I have to say.
Yes, exactly. That's excellent. You're clarifying again, or you're agreeing again, but you're being persistent because you got guts. You want to move this conversation out of an argument into a conversation. You want to do it. So you're going to stay with it until you're convinced I'm so pig-headed, I don't care. Okay, well done. All right, who else has a pivot statement they're willing to share? All right, Sally, go for it.
Terry, have you thought of what could be helpful to reduce such mass shootings or workplace shootings?
No, not really.
You're pig-headed.
No, you might hear that. No, not really. So what are you going to say when I say, no, Sally, not really? You could say, well, what kind of stupid ideas, what kind of fool are you that don't think about this? So, but think about what you would say to me if I say, no, not really.
Then maybe we can explore some methods that could reduce mishandling and poor use of guns, or having guns in the wrong people's hands.
Well done. Yes, you're sticking with the desire to continue the conversation in a different direction. That's good. Look, bear in mind, you have no idea what a real gladiator is going to say when you ask for permission to offer a different perspective. If you get a good one, they're going to say, sure, I'll listen. But you asked me a question, and I said, no, I haven't really ever thought about that. And some people don't. They just have strong feelings, and they've never thought about how to solve the problem. All right, somebody else, a pivot.
I said, can I share with you one solution I like as a start?
A nice pivot statement. You have indicated you have an idea on how to deal with the problem, and you're offering a pivot.
But I'm not telling you what the solution is, so you have to say yes if you want to find out.
Well, this is an important point. I got stopped in my tracks in one of my workshops when I was going through this, when someone said, well, I don't have another perspective. And I just sort of froze for a minute. And I thought, well, then why did you start down the road to a new perspective when you didn't have one to begin with? So, I mean, it's a sort of self-evident thing. You have to have, don't bother to pivot, just end the conversation after a clarification and agreement. Don't go there unless you have something you actually want to share. But the key is to get permission to share it so it doesn't sound argumentative. And remember what I said about a good perspective. It starts with a I statement. This is how I see it. This is how I feel. Okay, but your pivot statement was fine. One more pivot statement.
Looks like we haven't heard from Barbara Carter yet.
All right,
Yes,
Barbara.
I picked the liberal one and I boxed myself in, so I want to read it anyhow and save me. These mass shootings are a concern for all of us. I wonder if there is a way to talk about this with the Republicans, and I have a sense that person would say no. But since those problems happen where you box yourself in, how do we get ourselves out of it?
Well, what I heard, Barbara, is a nice combination of an agreement statement with a question. I wonder if it's possible to talk about, and I assume you're saying I'm a Republican, talk about this issue with you as a Republican.
No, with the Republicans, since that seems to be a big concern that they're crazy and you just can't deal with them. Well, maybe we could problem solve together and think about a way we could talk to the Republicans.
So where's the pivot here? Where's the request to me? You understand what I'm saying? I'm waiting for a request to go off in a different direction. That's what you want to do. It's a good question you're raising, But I'm not sure I would interpret it if we were in a conversation about guns as a request to go off in a different direction. It's more like you're just thinking out loud.
And we're still stuck in that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And if we have time, Margaret Knoll.
Okay, Margaret, sure we do.
I think I've actually gotten the answer to my question, because I was going to ask if a pivot statement can be a question. Like, so what can we do to prevent mass shootings? Could that be a pivot statement, or do you need to say, to follow up with saying, could I tell you some ideas I have?
Okay. Your comments answer your own question. A question is not a pivot statement. A question invites me to provide an answer. What you're asking for is permission to provide different information to me. That's what a pivot is. You're looking at this issue differently than I am. And you're asking me if it's okay if you share with me what you read in a recent article, what you heard in an editorial on television last night, or what, the conclusions you drew from the recent book you read about this issue, or whatever it is that you want to share. You're asking me to say, sure, Margaret, I'll be interested in what you have to say. If you ask me a question, you're simply asking me to provide an answer to the question, not allow you to share with me how you're looking at things. Does that answer your question? That's the problem with a question in any of these formats. It's an invitation for me to continue ranting.
I got it. Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? One last pivot. This is a hard skill. This is a really critical skill, and it's not as easy as I'm making it sound. Go ahead, Debbie.
Thank you. I have a pivot statement and I have a third line of it, and that's the part I want to ask you about. So the pivot statement is, I'd like to share another perspective on this topic. Can you hear me? And my third piece of that is, it's about safeguarding children. And my question for you, Terry, is it appropriate to introduce what I want to talk about before getting permission to talk about it?
I would advise against it.
I thought so. I already crossed it out, but I wanted to ask.
Yeah, no, but it's okay, because that's the different perspective you want to share. The first two parts of this, do you hear me? Do you want to hear what I have to say? That's a pivot statement. All right. And if I say yes, then what you crossed out becomes very relevant, because that's the direction you want to take the conversation.
Great. Thank you for confirming.
Okay. So hopefully everybody gets the idea here. You've clarified by paraphrasing. You didn't editorialize. You have found some area in my rant that you can agree with. It seems to me we're both really passionate about this. Then you pivot by saying, I would like to share with you a slightly different perspective on this, or something that I recently read in the newspaper, or something I heard last night from one of my favorite columnists, or whatever. And you want me to acknowledge it's okay for you to go there. And now it's time to go there. All right. So what I want you to do is to write down, based on whichever scenario you've been playing around with, a sentence or two that gives me a flavor of the different perspective that you want to offer here. And this is where real guts comes in, because this is where I don't agree with you at all. But that's not the point. Agreement, remember, in a conversation, reaching an agreement is not the goal. Understanding is the goal. And I'll say something about how you go from perspective to understanding. Don't make it too long. I just want to get a flavor of where you want to go here. And that's all you want to do at first. Okay. Who's got a perspective statement you want to share? Now remember, you've laid the groundwork. You've clarified, you've agreed, you've sought my permission to go in a different direction. You've got it. And now I need to know where you want to go. And tell me which scenario you're responding to so I'm clear. Who wants to go?
Gun owner friends have told me how eager they are to have safeguards keeping guns away from their own and other children who are visiting their homes.
Ah, very clear where you want to go in this conversation. Well done.
Hey, thanks.
Margaret, your hand's up.
I was going to say something similar, but just a little different. I've heard from a gun owner I know about what he thinks needs to be done to keep his guns out of the hands of someone who might misuse them.
Now there's a tantalizing perspective because it literally whets my appetite to find out what this person has told Margaret, right? So that clearly shows the direction she wants to go. And she's tantalizing me with, well, what did that gun owner tell you? Right. Well done. That's an excellent perspective statement that says where you want this quote unquote conversation to go, remembering you're no longer trying to win this. All you're trying to do is gain understanding. Teresa, your hand's up. Yes.
Yeah, Terry, I'm really concerned about the type of guns that are on the market today and who's using them. I think there should be some limitations on these types of weapons, who's manufacturing them and who's buying them. What do you think?
Okay. Yep. Another great, I know exactly where you want to go. I may like the idea of some limitations. I may not, but at least I know what you want to talk about. Very well done. How about one more?
I've been looking into guns as an issue of public health, and the cost and the trauma, etc. I didn't write it down. I just thought of it, so I don't have it
You're
down.
identifying what you've been looking into, and that
Yes.
you'd like to talk you'd like to share with me some of the things you're learning.
Yes.
Right? That's what I hear. You've been looking into this, and you want to share with me what you're learning. Excellent.
Terry, I'm concerned about the misuse of guns and having undesirable and harmful consequences.
Okay. You want to talk about the consequences for the misuse of guns. That's where you
Yes.
want this conversation to go.
Yes.
Okay. It's at this point that a gladiator that is willing to listen is a person with whom you can begin to explore some issue related to the whole issue. If I'm not willing to listen, if I don't care, this whole conversation, this whole discussion ended some time ago. But now you've invited me to talk about something you want to talk about, and we can proceed to discuss this. When you enter this particular phase of a conversation, before you pat yourself on the back for having done all these things perfectly well, clarify, agree, pivot, perspective, think about the importance now of trying to develop a deeper understanding of why I feel about the issue the way I do. See, we all have backstories here. We all have life experiences. The conservative may have grown up in Montana in a family, everybody owned guns, everybody they knew owned guns, et cetera. It said they've lived in a gun culture all their life. But if you can get them to tell the story about their background, their upbringing, their experiences, remember, you're not trying to convert them to anything. You're trying to understand why they feel the way they do. So once you get into a conversation about your perspective, the other side can expand on their perspective, and you begin to get a sense of the depth that supports your view on guns and their view on guns. And since you're not trying to convert anybody here, all you're trying to do is understand more fully, this is where you really want to be. Because there may be now more common ground you can build on in your relationship once you get there, but you've got to get through the rants and down to the perspective stage where you're exchanging perspectives. This is how I came to view this issue the way I do. And I now understand more about the way you do. So before I quit and just turn this over for some questions before we run out of time, let me tell you my favorite story around this issue. It came up in one of our workshops. We had a woman who, in the morning of one of our all-day red-blue workshops, somehow managed to communicate to the people in the room that she was passionately anti-abortion and a firm supporter of Roe versus Wade. So one of the people in the room listening to this obviously thought to themselves, I don't get this. I don't really see how that's possible. I mean, how can you support Roe versus Wade and be anti-abortion? You gotta pick sides. Come on. So in the afternoon, in what we call our questions session, where we get people to write down objective questions they want to ask somebody on the other side, one of the participants, and it's really, it's been so long ago, I can't remember exactly how this was done. But the way the question was formed was critical. The question came out this way. You know, this morning at various times, you seem to be both anti-abortion, strongly anti-abortion, and a firm supporter of Roe versus Wade. One could conclude those are contradictory points of view, but obviously they aren't for you. Would you mind sharing? This is the key part. Would you mind sharing with all of us how you got there? Now, how are you going to argue with that? No, she wasn't being called stupid or indecisive or anything else. She was asked to share. And here was her answer. I was born and raised a Catholic. I have been strongly anti-abortion since childhood. That's never going to change. But she said, I live in a country where millions of women are going to have abortions whether I want them to or not. And I cannot live in a country where that's illegal or has to be done in back alleys or in dangerous ways. I just can't. I know it seems a contradiction, but I've made peace with it. End of story. But it wasn't until the group had a chance to hear how she got to where she was that it all became understandable. Nobody's opinion changed. She didn't change, but a deeper understanding of how an individual can reconcile two seemingly contradictory points of view was obvious to everyone who heard this exchange. So that's why you want to get to the perspective stage in this process so that you can begin to explore other aspects of the problem with someone who fundamentally disagrees with your view on a lot of it and get a deeper understanding of how each of you got to where you were. Okay. So that's the CAP process. Yes, Becky.
I have a question, and this takes me back out of this analogy, out of the guns, or it could be guns, because I have a terrible problem with this, and that is that when we go to talk to legislators, they give us an average of 7.5 minutes. I count on 7.5 minutes of their time, and maybe we don't get that much. And sometimes they've had to reschedule several times. And finally, you're in to see them, and they're exhausted, and they're not really paying attention, and the staff is standing there tapping their feet. How can we implement this?
How can we what?
How can we implement this with the clock ticking?
You're not expecting the answer to that question from me, are you? it's really hard when people's attention span is short, and where you often feel that in the middle of your 7 minutes, they're already thinking about the next attention span they're going to have to give to the next issue. I mean, I understand this problem because when I went to work at the Central Intelligence Agency, I had just finished a doctoral dissertation, which is 350 pages, right? And I had to learn to write about very difficult subjects in 1 page, because we were all told policymakers are busy. They won't read more than a page. You put 5 pages in front of them, they won't read any more than the first page. So it starts out with an executive summary and then a couple of paragraphs. And your first instinct is, I'm sorry, this is too complicated an issue. I can't do that. But you learn to do it or you don't survive there, because that's the world in which you live. I think the only thing I can think of is by being repetitive, by keep trying to get their attention for the issue you want to put before them. So it may take 3 or 4 7-minute sessions for it finally to sink in that this is really important and you need their support. But I sympathize with trying to get busy politicians to pay attention for more than 5. And look, the human attention span is less than 7 minutes. You may have 7 minutes in the room, but what we know about attention span is it's lucky to be 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes before their mind starts wandering. So you better front load the key ideas up front, or even they don't get through. I don't know that I helped you very much, but it's an important question.
Yeah, but I have another one.
Okay.
Here's another scenario. My father, who is ancient, says, I'm so worried about my nephew who will not get a COVID shot. And my father said, I need help figuring out how to talk to him about this. And my father has no interest in medical issues at all, but he's worried that this young man will die. And when we have a power disparity here, my nephew will close down. He will not argue with my father. He respects him to the ends of the earth. How do they open this up?
It may be your father, Becky, is the wrong messenger.
Ah.
It just may be that in this dynamic, anything the father says is going to instantly have a wall pop up. That there's a long history here, right, of exchanges. So it may be he's the wrong messenger. The CAP process still works. It's still, I understand how you feel about this. I have some concerns about the vaccine as well, but I have a slightly different perspective on this. Do you mind hearing what I have to say? In the end, it's up to the vaccine resistant person to at least listen to a different optic. So it may be a different communicator is required to get this particular person to actually hear what you have to say. I watched an interview this morning between a right-wing radio host and Sanjay Gupta, the doctor from CNN. And in the end, Gupta got him to agree to get a vaccine shot. But he, if you listen to the whole interview, there was a lot of the, agreement, clarification. Do you mind listening to what I have to say? He used a lot of the same stuff without it really being spelled out that way. So think about a different messenger. Any other questions? I know dinner is beckoning.
Dr. Busch, if you have any resources you would like us to have, we'd be happy to share them.
Well, all I can tell you is if you haven't been to a Braver Angel workshop, you should consider doing that. Because we go into much more depth on a whole lot of these things. We talk about, the skills for effective listening and for, communication. We have a workshop that I love, which is called Depolarizing Within. It begins with the premise that we're all polarized. I don't care whether we're to the left or the right on issues, or we think of ourselves as exactly in the middle. We're all polarized, and recognizing our own interpolarizers is the first step to being able to communicate with people on the other side. We have a red-blue workshop where we put 7 or 8 liberals and 7 or 8 conservatives together for an entire day. And we have them share stereotypes of each other. We have them learn how to phrase effective questions. We have a workshop that I just started doing last weekend, which is called Family and Politics, where we actually talk about these particular skills as the way to have a conversation at the Christmas dinner table with a relative that you want to have a civil conversation with. So I encourage you to look at Eventbrite, to go to our national website, braveryangels.org, get acquainted with the work that we do. It's a tremendous resource. And the only other thing I'll say, and I'm a big believer in this, if you lean to the right, occasionally read something from someone who leans to the left. If you lean to the left, find somebody on the right who seems sane and sensible and read them as well. The more you can begin to see the world through different perspectives and respect the different point of views, the easier it is to communicate with other people. You guys were terrific. You really were. I hope you got as much out of it as I did in terms of just sheer enjoyment seeing you go through this exercise. Thank you for being part of it all.
Thank you, Dr. Busch. Debbie, did you have something quick?
I attended one Bravery Angels event sometime, give or take, a year ago. I do not recall what it was because I had just learned about the organization, and there were 4 or 5 groups of red and blue people. What was interesting to me about it, Terry, was that most of them were coming at the challenge of communication from a faith-based perspective, and they were rather beatific about it, which gave me a very strange feeling about the purpose and methods of Braver Angels. Is there anything you'd like to say about that?
These were the participants,
They
or
were.
were they the organizers, moderators, etc.?
They were participants, but they were part of the Braver Angels community. It almost gave the flavor of a cult. It was that strong and put me off. So I'm curious.
So I'll speak for myself as a moderator. I make it clear in the workshops that we expect people to represent themselves, not their political affiliations, not their social group memberships, not their religious faiths. So they need to speak for themselves. This is how I think. This is how I feel. Now, if somebody's whole worldview is faith-based, it's challenging. It's challenging. I have not personally encountered that. Usually, if I make it clear up front that that one of the ground rules for our workshops is, you are here as Terry Busch. We want to know what Terry Busch thinks, how Terry Busch views this issue, how Terry Busch sees this or that, not how your party or your friendships or your social group or anyone else sees it. And most people will stick to that. So I have not really encountered somebody who simply can't get out of a faith-based worldview of everything. I'm surprised that they would go to a Braver Angels workshop to begin with, because it is a neutral, nonpartisan. I've never experienced that. And we go out of our way to make it clear to people that we are not religious, we are not political, we don't represent any particular group, and we insist on people being themselves. Yet again, if somebody insists on being faith-based, then I'd have to experience it to see how I would handle it carefully, because I certainly don't want to insult anybody, and I don't want to question anybody's faith. But if somebody were to say, well, in my religion, this is this and this, I would say, well, this is not about how your religion looks at things. How do you look at things? And then they'd probably say, well, that's how I look at things. And I'd say, fine, that's how you look at things. That's your perspective. And hopefully that, if I had a room full of those people, I think it would be difficult. I don't know how-
Thank
It
you.
looks like we might have, oh, sorry.
I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Does that help?
It does. I didn't attend any further events because of the experience I had at that one, so maybe I will. Thank you.
All the events I've done, and I've done a lot of them, I have never encountered that. I have rarely had to rein somebody in. Usually they abide by the rules. It's just an unusual kind of event that would happen.
It looks like we have one last question from Mary Miller.
Okay, Mary.
Yeah, I just want to say that I've been fairly heavily involved with Braver Angels since the beginning of the year. And I have not had that experience at all, Debbie. Maybe it was just that one workshop. I'm not sure. We're trying to get, and I've done lots of workshops with and for with Braver Angels, and we're trying to get a chapter off the ground here in Eugene. And none of the core people, the half a dozen core people that are trying to get it off the ground, are affiliated with any particular faith in a strong way. So it's not an issue that's come up. So it just might have been that workshop. It's certainly not been my experience. I just want to share that.
Thanks, Mary. Mary and I work together on workshops, so we know each other's styles pretty well.
I think you all have done a superb job of participating. Thank you, Dr. Busch, for an excellent presentation.
You're
I'm
welcome.
ready to practice this with my dad.
And keep at it and keep at it, and don't beat yourself up when it fails. It's really easy to talk about this. I warned you, it's much harder to do it.